How nice to see you all.
Please be seated. It's always a great honor to have Jyotish and Devi visit us, since we are only one aspect of Ananda for which they are responsible. It's just not possible for them to spend as much time here as we would vote to have them be here. I was reflecting on the life that they've lived. Jyotish was there before there was an Ananda. He met Swamiji when Swamiji was still in San Francisco, when Ananda itself was just getting started. So there has never been an Ananda that didn't include Jyotish. And not merely in a background role, but with Swamiji relying upon him, especially in the early, rather tumultuous years, to be able to keep the peace, to stand up for the teachings, to be both practical and inspirational, and all the other qualities that make up an Ananda devotee and that Swami's training gives us. Devi is just slightly younger than him in the Ananda history, arriving at the beginning of the summer of 1969, which is the date from which we measure Ananda. So I think it's true to say that if any two people personify everything that we're doing, I think it is the two of them. And it was no surprise to the community in the last years of Swami's life when he designated Jyotish to be his successor. And the way he described it was, he said, it's necessary to have a visible example of the characteristics of an Ananda devotee, and the person who everyone will accept without the slightest hesitation because it's self-evident is Jyotish. And Devi is always standing next to him, and by extension their auras have always been essentially one aura and helping all the rest of us. I have given some thought to what would constitute the ideal Ananda devotee, because Swami spoke of that as part of the reason why there needs to be a designated successor. Humility, of course. I would add to that a good sense of humor. And a good sense of humor comes because you take yourself lightly. And we recognize that we're not here for ourselves, we're here to serve. And I think above anything else, that would be how I would define Jyotish and Devi's life, which I have observed at close quarters for most of it, not all of it. I'm a late arrival by comparison, but is a gradual erasing of self. It's just, we start out thinking that I'm going to be self-realized, and the emphasis is greater on the word I than it is on self-realized. And over time, that I simply gets erased, and it doesn't get erased in a one big dramatic moment. It gets erased by constantly saying yes to whatever is asked of you. And if there is a characteristic of the ideal Ananda devotee, it's the simple words, I am here to serve. And this is what is exemplified by our wonderful guest this evening, has been for more than 50 years, but only one day at a time, one day at a time. So if there is anyone who can tell you what Swami wanted, why he wanted it, what he did, how Ananda developed, what we went through to get here, then our two guests this evening are definitely those people. And so through this weekend of events tomorrow and our Sunday service, let each one of us try to learn how they have become who they are so that we can follow in their footsteps. So this evening, as always, we'll start with a prayer, and then we'll have music, and then we'll have an evening discourse by our two friends. So, welcome everyone. Opening prayer.
I had my eyes closed waiting for Asha to do the prayer, and all of a sudden she disappeared. Okay, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, Saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. O great Masters, beloved Divine Mother, show us how to live in this world in a way that will uplift our consciousness, will help others, and will bring us into realization of who and what we are. Om. Peace. Amen. And now I'm going to have music.
limp microphone. That'll work.
beautiful. Thank you. Somehow those three instruments play very nicely together.
Well, thank you all for coming this evening, and it's a joy to see many old friends and some new friends and some friends that were with us last week up at Ananda Village for Inner Renewal Week. And it's always a joy to come and share with our family here. And we have an important topic tonight that we'll share in a bit. But most of all, what Ananda's work is demonstrating divine harmony and friendship. And that's why that music is so, our music, Swami's music, is so important, because it's just you don't need any words to explain it, you feel it. And so it is with all of Master's path. You can hear all the teachings in the world, but that one moment when you feel Master's presence in your life, you can't explain it, but you feel it. And that's what really everything Ananda does, is try to give people the experience of God's presence within them, God's love within them and light. And you all are doing such a beautiful job here in the Palo Alto area of spreading that light and sharing that light and love through the school, through the church, through the yoga studio, through the incredible art exhibit we're going to have tomorrow. I hope you all can come. Many of Jyotish's paintings and prints will be there. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. I was thinking, you know, the music is a very nice analogy for the spiritual path. We have this wonderful body of music that Swami Kriyananda has written.
Is his mic working?
Yeah. Yes? No? Maybe? Perhaps?
Is it? Okay.
Okay, good. So we have this wonderful body of music that Swami Kriyananda created, or channeled, as he would put it. And we have these instruments that are capable of playing it. But the music can't play itself without the instruments. And the instruments can't play themselves without the music. But in between needs to be a willing operator to marry the two together. And the musicians are necessary. So our will, you know, God is waiting. He's got the script and the music and this beautiful symphony and angel choir ready to express through us. And he's given us these bodies, these instruments. But until we are willing operators and connectors of that, nothing's going to happen. So that's partly why Yogananda came, was to get us to be willing.
And I will step aside.
Okay.
But I do want to say how much we're enjoying watching the sign language. It's just delightful. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand what we're saying.
So Yogananda, we've been asked to share on Yogananda's mission and role in coming into the world. And it's a very, very important topic, but it really is to understand it, we have to understand that there's a very, very long rhythm to life. In the teachings of Sri Yukteswar, he talks about the cycle of the yugas, which is a 24,000-year cycle. And so that very long rhythm of a very high society coming down to the lowest society and then coming back up to that high society again. So within that long rhythm, there are certain points that are especially important. And those points especially are the changing of the yugas, or the changing of the ages. And this group of masters, Yogananda and Jesus and Babaji and Sri Yukteswar and Lahiri Mahashaya, they have come again and again, especially at times when the world is ready for a change and needs direction in how that change can and should happen. So in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a wonderful stanza that says, when evil is predominant and virtue is in decline, I will incarnate in order to destroy evil and uplift virtue. Well, I'm not sure that that this is the age of the greatest evil, but certainly it's an age that needs direction, an age that needs help. You know, in the autobiography of a yogi, there's this wonderful chapter about Babaji in the Himalayas. Babaji, this deathless saint, deathless avatar. And in the Himalayas, let's imagine a couple of 100 years ago, because that's when it took place, Babaji, in his body form, Jesus appeared. These great masters can appear whenever and however is necessary. In fact, one time Yogananda was sitting in Encinitas on the bluff overlooking the ocean, and one of his disciples saw the vision of kind of a medieval monk. And so he came to Yogananda and said, "Who was that?" And Yogananda said, who was what? He said, "Well, didn't you see there was this medieval monk on the side of on the cliffside?" And Yogananda said, "Oh, so many come to this body." In fact, I read, this is an odd but a funny statement, and since so many of you are relatively long-term members of Ananda, so this happened to Yogananda's second most advanced disciple, Yogacharya Oliver Black. So he was visiting Yogananda, and they were in the sitting room, and then Yogananda had to go and take care of some business. So he told Yogacharya Oliver Black, he said, "Just wait here for me." And then soon after Yogananda walked out the door, this Indian man came. Oliver Black described him as being very tall and dressed in Indian clothing, and he just kind of leaned on the door. He said he kind of leaned sideways against the door jamb, and he didn't say a word, but just looked at Oliver Black, and then Yogananda started coming back, and the fellow disappeared. Now, this was not vision, this was a manifestation. And so when Yogananda came, Oliver Black was quite excited about the whole thing and described what had happened. And Yogananda said, "Well, describe this person to me." And so Oliver Black did that. And Yogananda just laughed, and he said an Indian name. Mr. Black didn't remember the name in telling this story, but said the Indian name. "Oh, he's always playing pranks like that." So there's a world that goes on that we don't yet see. But that's partly why these great masters come into the world, is to awaken us to what is really going on, and more importantly, whether we see somebody leaning against a doorway or not, it's phenomenal only because he manifested there. But if one of us were leaning against a doorway, we wouldn't even think to mention it. So what's the big deal about that? They don't care about that, but they care about the ability of the consciousness to be able to perceive the hidden world that we aren't able yet to perceive. And so a couple of 100 years ago, Christ, who in the autobiography, it says that Jesus and Babaji are responsible for, they're the caretakers of this world on a spiritual level. And so they met together and they looked ahead into the coming age, and they perfectly foresaw just the kind of world that we live in. Very restless, very outward, materialistically driven, with a lot of confusion. And so seeing that ahead, they began to plan what needed to happen in order for us to be able to live in this age that we find ourselves in as successfully and as happily as possible. Because it's all God's dream. And to a certain extent, the only agenda He has is, one, for us to be happy, and secondly, for us to wake up, because ultimately, being a part of Him, we will never be satisfied until we wake up to our own true reality. So everybody in the world feels like they're lacking something. Everybody's thinking, I would be happy if only. And that goes on and on. We get refined, more refined in the if only, how we fill in that blank. But that sense of needing something more goes on and on and on until ultimately what we're really lacking is the knowledge of who we are, to re-merge with God who has created us. And so that's the long drama that goes on through all these cycles. And we live through cycle after cycle after cycle. And we incarnate in those times that suit exactly, or as best they can, that suit the kind of environment where we can learn the lessons that we need to learn in order to merge back into God. But in each age, kind of the general way of learning those lessons is different. And so 200 years ago, Babaji and Jesus met together and they began to strategize about how can we help mankind. Their mission is to help us, to uplift us, to help work with our consciousness. So they're, I don't know, probably mentally discussing. They don't need to use words, but they're discussing how we can do that. And that begins the mission of these great masters, because their job was to incarnate at this time in order to show us how to live successfully, how to be happy. And Yogananda especially did that, had to do that on multiple different levels. But I'll come back to that. I just want to give us a little bit of a sense of the deeper background. And then after Babaji, the next in our line of masters is Lahiri Mahashaya. We read in the autobiography about him having a magical encounter with Babaji and then wanting to help with spreading Kriya Yoga and asking that Kriya Yoga, this high technique, be able to be given more widely. And we think, oh, that's lucky that he asked that question. Well, he incarnated in order to ask that question. He had, from the past, a longing to make sure that in this age, that men and women who were going to be busy and were going to be restless and were going to have all kinds of difficult demands on them and couldn't spend hours and hours every day worshiping God, doing sadhana, he wanted to be sure that those people were taken care of, and the way spiritually taken care of. And so the way to do that is with a very efficient technique, which Yogananda calls the jet airplane path, because a little bit of Kriya is worth a whole lot of outward religion or outward ceremony. And so they're working on this very long rhythm. And then Yogananda, of course, incarnated specifically in order to bring these great teachings of India to the West, but not just the teachings of India. It's that the time has come that there's a marriage between the East and the West that's symbolized perfectly by Jesus, whose mission to the world is primarily in the West, and Babaji, who was in a former incarnation Krishna, whose mission is primarily to India and the Orient, those two meeting together. And what that means symbolically is that the temperaments or the energies that were separated, East and West, in the darker ages, now need to come together. And so the Western efficiency that we all have, specialized in, one might say, and the Indian high-minded, philosophical, spiritual energy, which India has held that flame better than any country through the millennium ages that have happened. They've held on to that flame of great high philosophy, connection with God, the great masters passing down the teachings from guru to disciple. They've kept that flame alive for thousands of years. And so, but now the time has come that those two kind of separate energies, the practical and the spiritual, be wedded together. Devi and I spend a lot of time in India, and we obviously spend a lot of time in America and in the West too. But we can see with our eyes in so many ways this mixing of East and West that Yogananda said, and Babaji and Christ, that symbol of them meeting together, bringing these two energies together. Many, many people in India seem like Western businessmen, or not just businessmen, but doctors and scientists and computer experts, and here in Silicon Valley especially, we have a mixing of Indian and all the races together, but we also have, and we can begin to see this, a deep and awakening yearning for some kind of direct experience of spirituality. Yogananda said, one of the most important statements, the time for knowing God has come, meaning that it isn't enough now just to worship God at a distance, but the time to know God, to feel Him, to experience Him within. His first disciple in America was Dr. Lewis, and Dr. Lewis had been with him for quite some time. And Yogananda said, "Doctor, you're praying all wrong." And Dr. Lewis said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Don't pray to God, pray in God." Meaning, don't keep God, don't keep spirituality, don't keep the divine mentally outside of yourself, somewhere distant, somewhere beyond, and then worship that, because you are that which you're worshiping. So we need to begin to practice the techniques that will allow us to perceive the God that is already within. So this basically was the basic mission of these masters. But Yogananda had a specific mission too. My throat is dry. Thank you. Yogananda had a specific mission too, and that was to bring these teachings, especially to America. Most of you have read the autobiography of a yogi, and there's a, thank you, get a little table. There's a wonderful scene. Yogananda started a boys' school, and he had a lot of boys, and naturally he was not only the head, but he was just fun. You know, he had such a vibrant, high personality, so the kids always wanted to be around him. And so He had to sneak away in order to find any place to be alone. And so there was a little storeroom, and he would sneak into the storeroom and close the door, and then thank you. Could meditate a little while in there. So he was in the storeroom, and he was meditating, and a vision came to him, and he saw all these faces. And in the autobiography, he says, Americans, these must be Americans. And he felt the souls of potential saints calling him to come to America. And maybe some of those souls are sitting here tonight, because that desire for these high teachings was reaching out, and he was able to perceive on subtle planes the desire of all of us for these teachings. And so then he got discovered. One of the little boys came in. But imagine this. Imagine you're the head of a school with, I don't know, by this time, maybe 1,500 students, something like this. You have a vision in the morning that you're supposed to go to America. You've dedicated all of your energy in building this school and making it successful. You have this vision, and by the afternoon, you're on a train leaving. Now that in and of itself is a really fine example for us. We need to be flexible so that if we feel we get something that feels like the call of the divine, we need to have that flexibility of consciousness to respond to that, because the divine is all. Remember, I was saying that the divine is always sending out the energy to us. It's trying to guide our lives, each one of us, and the more we can tune into it, the more that we will then be able to maneuver just exactly the way we're supposed to in this lifetime. Master Yogananda said this life is for our entertainment and education. And then he added wryly, but how few are either educated or entertained. And so whatever's happening is our soul trying to draw to it the experiences that will lead us back to the realization of our unity with God. So then Yogananda brings this, one might say, ancient Vedic understanding of the ultimate goal of life, which is to merge back into God. He brings that to America, but America in the 1920s, imagine the task that he had in order to get that message across. They don't call it the Roaring Twenties for no reason. You know, it wasn't exactly, we think, oh, well, back then, you know, everybody was calm and happy and ready to receive these teachings, but we're more ready than they were at that time. So he came into a field of operation that was very, very difficult. But of course, this was a divine mission. He again and again, he'd been told by Babaji also that you will succeed in this mission, and you'll be able to carry out the will of God. And so he came, and within 3 years of his arrival, he began his public teaching. Within 5 years of his arrival, he was the most popular public speaker in America. And so that enormous divine power was behind him. But what kind of teaching was he doing? We think, well, he went from this city to that city and so on. He went on tours, and we've probably seen the pictures of him at Carnegie Hall or some big auditorium with thousands of people. And we think that that's what he was doing. He was night after night speaking in these vast arenas. Well, in fact, those big public talks were only him casting a wide net, as wide as he could. And if you ever look at the titles of some of his talks, how to find your ideal life partner, how to live happily and healthily forever, how to outwit death. All kinds of really interesting topics. You can see why people might have been attracted to come to those lectures. But the fact is that because of his power and his magnetism, they came back night after night after night after night. And so he'd give a public lecture. But in the earlier years, he would also stay in a city for a month or 6 weeks, and he would teach night after night, sometimes twice a day. And he would meet with groups. And city after city after city, he would do this. So he was churning the ether. He himself initiated, it was estimated that maybe as many as 100,000 people into Kriya Yoga. So our teachings, we have the teachings of meditation, the kind of progress through beginning meditation, and then you understand more Raja Yoga, you understand that. And then if you want to go on to Kriya, you progress on to Kriya. Well, he was doing all of that alone and with this enormous power. So he was working on 2 levels at the same time at this point. A 3rd level was yet to come, but the 2 levels were that he had this enormous public work, highly recognized, known everywhere, very popular. He would meet with the president here in California. When he went to Hollywood, he would meet with all the stars, and so he was meeting all these famous people. Meeting with the stars reminds me, there's a charming story. There's a man who was a movie star, and he was also a really, really fine singer. He sang a kind of jazz singer, sang with many of the big bands in that era. His name was Dick Haynes, and he became a follower of Yogananda. And he himself told this story, which is charming. He said, so I was talking with Yogananda, and I said, my experience with religion is all religion does is say, you shan't do this, and you shan't do that, and you must not do this, and that is an evil thing. I want to know what I can do. And Yogananda said, well, good question. Do you smoke? I imagine Yogananda could smell it on him. Do you smoke? Well, yes, I do smoke. You may continue. And do you drink alcohol? Yes, I do drink alcohol. You may continue. And do you like the company of women? Yes, I do like the company of women. And to the great surprise, you may continue. And Dick Haynes was shocked at this response. It had no relationship to his earlier religious upbringing. But then Yogananda said, but let me warn you that if you take up these teachings, the desire to do those things will fall away. And so that it's a fun story. It's a nice example. But that's really the second level that Yogananda was working with. The first was, he was giving these classes, and it's like, I want to know what I can do. How can I be successful? How can I find a husband or a wife? How can I be healthier? How can, so he was responding to this. This is what you can do. Continue with this. I'll show you how to do it more successfully. But then he was saying, but let me show you a deeper science. So those outward desires and that outward energy will begin to fall away. And so what he was doing with this mass consciousness was he was trying to get people to begin, not that he didn't want them to be successful. He did, and he taught a lot of techniques of how to be successful because it's part of life. But he wanted us to begin to ask the deeper questions. Why do we want to be successful? Because we were asking, the culture then, the culture now, is basically asking the wrong questions. In Silicon Valley, you're all sitting here. There are some people that are asking not how can I be successful, how can I get possessions, a house, a car, or whatever. Most people are asking that, and there's a kind of a secondary thought that obviously then, if I get a bigger house or I rise up in the corporate ladder, then I'll be happy, or I'll be successful, or I'll be satisfied. But nobody ever is satisfied with that. And so until we begin to ask the right questions, we're always going to get, if we ask the wrong question, we're going to get the wrong answer. And so if you ask the question, how can I find happiness outside of myself? You'll get, you can Google that, I'm sure. You probably get about 387 million ways to find happiness outside of yourself. But unfortunately, not a single one of those is going to work. So, because the happiness that we're seeking is inside, so nothing outside is going to be able to satisfy that. So, the second level of Yogananda's great mission was to begin to teach people the art and science of going within. And so meditation, pranayama, he came up with the energization exercises so that people could learn how to begin to control energy. His whole path of meditation and inwardness, and then a great deal of emphasis on the kinds of attitudes, the kinds of activities, the mode of life that would lead to us being able to be more in control of our energy and of our reactive process, because the happiness that we're seeking lies within. And so his second level was to teach people the means by which they could withdraw that energy and find their own deeper self that resides within. So, as I was saying, he would go to city after city after city. He would give lecture after lecture after lecture. He began to write books. He wrote lessons. So this enormous energy going out, he said he was churning the ether with that energy because the mission was to uplift the whole consciousness of mankind at this time, but then more specifically for those people who really wanted to learn his teachings, he put enormous energy into sharing those teachings. But then at a certain point, I think it was around 1936, he said, he had the message essentially from God that the time for all of the outward, the going around, traveling around the country, the time for that had begun to come to an end. And he said, now I'm going to stay in one place at Mount Washington in Los Angeles and let those hungry, dedicated students come to me. Because as widely as he put out that energy, it still was a little bit like writing on water. And it would be there for a little while, and then people's lives would come and they would go on with their lives. We know people who have relatives who met him at that time. And some of them he would give a lot of energy to. Some people that, Ananda, who you know, her uncle, was a disciple of Yogananda, had several letters that he wrote. But he was caught up in his life. So just meeting even a great master like that didn't make enough of the karma was not there for those people to be able to completely dedicate their lives to the spiritual search. And so Yogananda then did the third part of his mission, one might say. He began to draw disciples. Thank goodness one of those disciples was Swami Kriyananda. And so he, to a certain extent, he did that through the autobiography of a yogi. That was like his great invitation. Come read this. Be magnetized by this consciousness. See if you're really interested. And only a few said yes to the RSVP part of that, which was, yes, I want to go deeper. Well, Swami Kriyananda was one of those who he got that invitation, Friday afternoon, and by Sunday morning he was on a bus coming across country. And so Yogananda began drawing those disciples to him, because obviously even a great master has only one lifetime with a certain number of years in it. And so he had to then train people that could carry on the work that, his mission to uplift consciousness, his mission to train people in meditation and to have all of these teachings about how to live successful and happy lives. And so from Yogananda started in 1920 with a single disciple. Now there are millions. The last time I checked, at the time Yogananda came to America, let's call it 100 years ago, there were probably less than 100 people who meditated in the whole country. Last time I checked, it was something like 35 million Americans have a daily practice of meditation. And so there's that enormous change, but so that mission that started as a small seed now is growing and growing and spreading and spreading. And so that upliftment of consciousness is going on, but ultimately it comes down, if it's going to spread, it comes down to those three levels that Yogananda was working with. There needs to be a kind of a mass projection of the teachings. So Swami Kriyananda, what did he do for this? He wrote 150 books to get it out there. All of us are doing our parts. Devi and I just finished our 500th blog, weekly blog. So every week for 10 years, we've been sending out a weekly blog to tens of thousands of people to try to spread this out, so that light has to keep being spread out and spread out and spread out. But the more we as individuals tune into that, the more we will draw from it, because it will have the potential to take us to our own self-defined soul goal, which is union with God. When Yogananda was a tiny baby, remember his mother took him to Lahiri Mahashaya to have him blessed, and Lahiri said, your son is a great spiritual engine who will carry many, many people to God. Well, that train is going through and stopping at station after station, and people can get on or not, but they can also get off. So people come, they get into the teachings a little bit, and that's all they want for this lifetime. But there are some of us who not only want to stay on that train, but we want to, I don't know what you do on a train to help out. You don't shovel coal anymore. But whatever it is to help that train move along the tracks, we want to be part of that. And so I think that applies to most everybody in the room tonight, is that we, to a certain extent, we were born to be part of the mission that Yogananda had. And it's a grand adventure. It's a great joy, and it's so much better to have a group of friends like all of us to have this wonderful spiritual search and spiritual adventure that we can travel together, because it would be dry not to have friends, spiritual friends. And so I'll just end by saying I think the primary vibration of Ananda is, and this was that Swami Kriyananda set this vibration in motion. The primary vibration of Ananda is spiritual friendship. He used to sign almost all of his letters in divine friendship. And that kind of, in India they would call it the bhav, the kind of corporate DNA of Ananda is just helping each other, sharing our lives together, enjoying being together, supporting each other, but also not stopping at one group to share in wider and wider and wider circles, because that upliftment of consciousness, divine love, divine friendship, and deep teachings, that was really the mission that Yogananda came to bring to the world. And that mission didn't stop when his body ended. It's continuing with his energy, but also continuing through everybody who wants to be in tune with that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this great adventure together. And it's fun, isn't it? God bless you.
So, switching translators. So we've been speaking of the role of Yogananda's mission in the world today. And I would like to change it a little bit, the title, and say our role in Yogananda's mission in the world today. And Jyotish was referring to that as well. But to get a handle on this, it's important to get kind of a bigger perspective. And I remember reading a book some years ago called The View from Atlantis. Very interesting book. And it starts off talking about in the 1800s in England, this parish priest was going from church to church, serving little congregations. And then one day, he was walking along the English countryside, and all of a sudden his vision, his awareness began expanding and expanding, and he could see that there were these lines of energy, of magnetism going along the countryside, and on all along that line, there were old megalithic structures from a higher age, and what we call them now are ley lines. But he saw that, and no one had ever seen that before. And then they began investigating, and they saw, wow, this is really, there's something here. There are magnetic lines that run through the countryside, and ancient higher civilizations realized this and built centers of spiritual consciousness along them. So we live in and those lines had always been there from many, many centuries. We live in a time also now where it's a busy time, so much going on that it's hard to see, as they say, the forest for the trees. And I was recently, a few days ago, looking at some articles on a news feed that I get, and the first article was, what's going on with your gut bacteria? And it had this wonderful image of the good little bacteria and the bad little bacteria and how they were clustering and fighting with each other. And then the next article was, what countries are aligning with Russia and what countries are aligning with the West? And it was like the graphics were almost the same. And I thought, wow, from a bigger perspective, it's the same thing as gut bacteria. It's just who's aligning with who. And you get back far enough and you look at this poor little planet and what we're doing to it and to each other. And that's, the great ones can see this all the time. They can say, oh, it's such a little thing. And it seems, just microscopic like the gut bacteria, but it's nations and important, powerful people with great weapons. And, it's just little. But what is big and what is real, and that's what Yogananda came to show. And really, it's so important for each of us to understand we are not here randomly. We are here from a long line of development. Sometimes we'll meet people that come to the expanding light and they'll say, oh, well, I'm new to the path. And you look in their eyes and you just think, you are not new to the path. You've been doing this for lifetimes, my friend. And now you're just coming to a point in your incarnation where it can click in better. But I remember Swami used to like to tell the story of when he would go to this specific story. He took a group of his friends from Italy who were visiting to Disneyland for the first time. And two of this party were an older gentleman and his wife, and he'd been a man of, had a lot of responsibility and respect, a prominent person. And so they were going on the different rides at Disneyland, and they went on the Jungle Cruise. And I don't know if you've ever been on it, I imagine most of us have. And you get on this little boat, and there's a steering wheel, and you think you're steering it, but really it's on a track under the water. And so Swami was on one boat and his friend Johnny and Maria were in another boat. And Swami said, hello, Johnny, hello, Johnny. And Maria, the wife, said, wave to Swami. And the man said, don't interrupt me. I have to steer this boat. And then when they finally disembarked, Swami said, don't you understand? You weren't steering at all. It was on a track. And that's how most people live. You think, oh, I am in control of my life. I'm choosing where I'm going to go. And look, there's two hippopotamuses, and I'm going to steer away from them. But we're not in charge. And we're not in control. And most people just get drifted along with the current. And then, how did I end up this way? I never thought I'd end up in this corporation or this profession. But they just go on the track. But what Yogananda came to show, and this is our role in his mission, and what Kriyananda manifested so remarkably, was if you align your will with a higher purpose, you can accomplish miracles. And when you look, I remember the first day I came to Ananda, 1969, 4th of July. I was reading autobiography of a yogi. I was finishing college in Madison, Wisconsin in the Midwest. And I was reading autobiography. I took my last final, and I was telling Shanti and Asha today, I did well in school. It meant nothing to me. It just came easy. I was a Phi Beta Kappa and all that. And I studied hard. I did, all that. And I aced everything. But I had my last course that I had to take for my degree in anthropology was African literature. And I just wasn't interested. I never read one book. I never did one homework assignment. And then I took the final, which I had to pass. And I got a B+. And I thought, I've been working so hard, all my classes, and I aced them, but with doing nothing, I got a B+. I think I was wasting a lot of time. And so I finished that final, I remember, closed the blue book, got a ride all across from the Midwest to Ananda, and I arrived, I had a suitcase, a backpack, and a sleeping bag, and I didn't really know anybody, I just stood there, and then I felt this energy, like a wind, but it wasn't a wind. I'd never felt anything quite like it. And this energy kind of moving up to me, past me, in front of me. And there was this man, I really didn't know who he was, slightly taller than I am, medium height. He was wearing Bermuda shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. His hair was long, but knotted back in a bun. And I had been traveling on the road for 3 days, so without a shower or anything. And he walked up to me and he said, and I looked like something the cat had dragged in. He said, "You look like a Phi Beta Kappa." And how he knew that, what he was trying to do was affirm something good about me, which was not easy to discern at that moment. But then he kept walking, and I felt this wind. As I say, it wasn't a physical wind, but I felt this movement of energy. And then someone said, "That's Swami Kriyananda." And I thought, he's going to do something great here. I had never heard him lecture before, but I could just feel he had aligned his will with a greater purpose, and he was going to be able to accomplish things that we couldn't even imagine. And he did. I mean, what he did, but again, it was never, I'm doing this. There was the surrender of all of his energy and creativity and dynamism and vision into the path into alignment, like that track of that little boat, the track that his guru had set out. And so by doing that, and he was able to accomplish just amazing things. We were visiting him in India. This was 2006, I believe. He was living in Gargaon. He had a house there. And we were coming to visit. And it was a big house, but he had his staff, his cook and his secretary and his nurse. He wasn't well by then. And so all the rooms were taken. But he said, "Oh, I want you all to stay in the house with me, but there's no room. But what I did is I built a little shack up on the roof for you to live in." And it was like a little screen porch, like mosquito net on just a little post. And it was right next to the generator, which went off all the time, and because the power would go off. And he said, "So I made this room for you to stay in." And we called it the bird cage because it was just, there was no walls. It was just mesh. And there was no anything, it was just like a little bird cage. But we were so happy to be there. But Swami's office was right across a little walkway. And at that time, he had started writing the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. And it was so beautiful. So we were there, and he'd work. We could see when he was working. He'd work till like midnight, 1 o'clock, and then he'd go and sleep, and then he'd be back in there 3 or 4 in the morning, just constantly. And then we'd be kind of all crumpled up in the bird cage, and he'd come in and say, "I've written the next chapter," and we said, "Oh, Swami, let's hear it." And it was the most dynamic, wonderful thing. But he was a man in his late 70s by this time, maybe early 80s, and not well. He had many things wrong with his body. But to find that way to put out that magnetism and to create something such a gift to the world, and that was just one of many things he did. But we don't want to stop and say, "Wow, wasn't he great?" What he was showing us was how to do it. You align, whatever it is you're doing, if you're doing a school, if you're writing a book, if you're teaching yoga, whatever it is, if you're planting a garden, if you're directing a play, if you're creating costumes, whatever it is. It was funny, we were at Asha's when some costume parts came, and there was a long black, for the school play, a long black wig, which the little boy who's going to play Yogananda is going to wear. And I thought, oh, wow, can I wear that tonight? That's really nice looking. But anyway, just to align our energy with our guru, to align it with his mission, and we'll be able to accomplish amazing things. Swami never saw himself as special. He said when he would be, someone would be introducing him on this, to give a talk, and they would be saying all these very exalted things about him. He said, then when it was my time to talk, I felt like a little mouse just running out on the stage. He never, because he didn't think it was his energy. Whatever I have, I pour it into the flow of your vision and your grace, and that's what he did. And that's why it was so empowering to be around him, because you felt, here is a soul who is holding nothing back, and he's laying it all at his guru's feet. And we would see miracles happen. And his life was, no matter what happened to him, there was never any self-reference or any, oh, this is difficult. Once, towards the end of his life, he was living in Pune, India at that time, he went into kidney failure. And they had to take him to the hospital, emergency, and put him on dialysis. And he survived that, but it was touch and go. And we called up from America his nurse, Miriam, how is it going? And she said, well, I'm standing in his room with him. Do you want to talk with him? And we said, yes, if we can. And so Swami said, they tell me that I have so many tubes coming out of me. You know, I'm laying in bed and there's so many tubes coming out of me. I look like a plate of pasta. And I mean, what do you do with someone like that there's nothing that's going to diminish his joy and his positive energy? And all you can do is say, I want to be like that. Whatever he's having, I want, you know. So to look, as Jyotish was saying, what is it that we can express, and the different qualities? So we have Babaji and Master, and they came centuries apart, but there were similarities in their mission, in that they came into a materialistic, unreceptive environment. Jesus in Israel, America coming, or Ananda, Yogananda coming to America, but they had to be warriors. They had to say, I will stand no matter what happens. I will stand in the truth of God. And Master did not have to undergo too much persecution. I think there was more than we know, racial prejudice against him in that time. But nevertheless, the courage that they had to stand up for God's will and to fulfill that mission. And what can we do in our lives to be more courageous? You know, there's a story of Dr. Lewis, Master's first Kriyaban in America. And he was, had been initiated. Master blessed him and was guiding him. He was a dentist. And one day, a patient came in to Dr. Lewis, and Yogananda was in Boston at the time. That's where Dr. Lewis lived. But he was living quite a distance away. And this man started denigrating Yogananda. What are you following that person for? It's all fake. And, and Dr. Lewis didn't say much, but it made an impact. Subconsciously, when someone criticizes your path or your guru, it's hard just to diminish it. And the man left. As soon as he left, the door burst open. Yogananda came running in. He knew what had happened. And he said, "Do you still love me, doctor?" and you give me your unconditional love. And it just like knocked all that negativity out of his head. He said, yes, Master, I give you my unconditional love. And Yogananda said, that's good. And he left. That's all it took. But to have the courage not to say, capitulate when people denigrate what you're doing, or to allow that negativity of your own self-doubts to come in. Am I getting anything out of this? Am I getting anywhere with meditation? Be a courageous hero and say, Master God, whether if I die with having accomplished nothing, I give you every moment of this life. And I'm not looking for rewards, but have, as those masters had the courage of their convictions, we need to have the courage to keep going and not to tread water. You know, Swamiji said on the spiritual path, you either move forward or you move backward. There's no treading water. So if you think you're kind of, well, just kind of holding my own here, you know what? You're going backwards. You can't tread water. If you're not putting out increased energy, you're not moving forward. And if you're not moving forward, then you're just kind of stalled. You're stagnant. And so look at yourself. Be courageous. Challenge yourself the way they challenge themselves. You know, someone said to Master, one of his disciples, an Indian man named Devi Mukherjee, Master was correcting him once for some behavior that he had done that was wrong. And we met Devi in India. He was quite a character. But so he was sort of like whining. And he said, oh, well, that's easy for you to say, Master. You're a master. And Yogananda got very stern. And he said, what do you think made me a master? It was facing life's challenges and having the courage and putting out the energy and keep setting your bar, your spiritual bar, honestly, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And I'll say from personal experience, Jyotish and I, he came to the path a few years before me, but you know, it's over 50 years now. And I say with humility, but I say it as a guideline for you, we are always challenging ourselves spiritually. How much more can we meditate? How much deeper can we get in the techniques? What more do we need to add? And if you do that, you start building momentum and you start realizing, wow, I'm not doing this by myself. There's an energy that's moving this forward. So to have the courage of these great masters. And then Babaji, what was his mission? To unite East and West, to bring differing cultures, the best of all, together. And this is what we need to do. And I think we're doing it beautifully throughout Ananda. But just to say, one, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all are valid. And to live a life in such a way that you're emphasizing unity in the world, unity with other cultures, other religions, and not just sometimes you just feel, I feel it in myself sometimes, like you'll just be withdrawn a little bit from a certain group or something, and I think, no, our masters came to unite all people, and I am not going to let those sectarian differences enter my heart. And so to keep living those teachings. And then Lahiri Mahashaya, again, I mean, we just say, oh yeah, Lahiri, you know, he was an accountant. But think again of what he did and how up in the Himalayas with Babaji. And then he didn't want to leave, but Babaji said, no, you must go back and be a model for humanity to show that the highest states of yoga and fulfilling your destiny are both your worldly karma. Not that he had worldly karma, but he was demonstrating it, that both are possible. Recently, in, I believe it was September, we went to Varanasi and we were meditating outside Lahiri's house. We couldn't go in, but there's a little, across the very narrow street, there's little benches, and our group all sat there and meditated. And it was lovely because it was a thoroughfare. People were walking by, and motorcycles were going by, and parents were taking their children to school on their motorcycles. But so many people stopped and just touched the door of Lahiri's house. And you know, you could feel it was a heartfelt thing, and then they would go on their way. All these years, and he's still radiating that inspiration, that strength to people, that you can do this, you can live your life, you can raise your children. He had 5 children. And, you know, there's a remarkable story of, he had a daughter, Lahiri, and his wife had one of their 5 children was a daughter. And she married, was living with her husband, his family, and she became very ill. And, you know, here's Lahiri who could heal anybody. I mean, miracles and miracles. And he took some oil and he gave it to, and he blessed it and he gave it to his wife. And he said, go to the parents' home and give her this oil. And so the woman went, his wife went, but when she got to the family home, they were Indian, of course, but not open. They were not open to alternative medicine. They were just using Western medicine. And she tried to say, well, this is some oil from my husband. He hid who he was. They didn't know who he was. And they said, no, we're working with the doctors. We don't need your oil. And his daughter died. And then he came that evening, the disciples came to Lahiri's home for satsang, and they said, oh, Master, you've had such a loss in your family. We don't need to have a satsang tonight. You probably aren't up to it. And Lahiri said, no, it's fine, we can do it. And they said, well, we're so upset and distraught for your daughter passing, we can't be here. And they said, don't you feel anything? And he said, understand this. I feel it much, much more deeply than you do. But he said, your minds, your consciousness are like soft mud. And when an impression is made on them, that impression stays. The impression of loss and grief, it stays. He said, my mind is like a slab of granite. That impression came, that loss came, and I felt it, but it leaves no impression. And so that's one of the, Lahiri was trying to show us, live in the world. It will not be easy. There will be losses and griefs and sorrow and suffering, but it doesn't have to leave an impression on your consciousness. And we have to be able to demonstrate that too, to live in the world and show people, yes, this happened to me. The same thing happened to me. Yes, I had cancer. I lost a child of mine at a young age. My husband died tragically. Whatever it is, we lost all the money we had, but we remain, our consciousness doesn't have to have an impression. This is our role, what we can show other people, what we can demonstrate. We had a friend who was a nurse in an emergency room in a hospital in San Francisco. She was a Kriyaban. And, you know, emergency rooms are pretty, demanding, frenetic, overwhelming places. But at lunchtime, she would always go out into her car in the parking lot and just meditate and do Kriya. And then she'd come back, and her coworkers just said, how do you do what you do? You're so calm all the time. You're so peaceful. You're so unflustered by whatever comes at us. And she just said, well, I have, she didn't say much, but she just said, I have practices that I do. But what we're doing, just as Jyotish was saying, Yogananda casting these seeds, big seeds, do not underestimate the power of a life lived in attunement with the Guru. Maybe we don't have a mission to lecture to 5,000 people in Carnegie Hall, but one person, one coworker who says, wow, that person is always calm. That person is always positive and supportive. That can change somebody's life. They would think, I would like to be able to be like that. And if it's their destiny, they'll find their way to the teachings. One harmonious family that's living joyfully and well integrated, and their neighbors see them and they say, wow, how do they do that? How do they have such a harmonious, happy, joyful situation? Even though I know they're going through some challenges, it makes an impression on people. So Lahiri, living the life, living it in our daily life and letting people, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who can see can say, wow, those people are doing something different. You know, we had an amazing experience when we were on our way in August to Assisi, and then we flew on to India after a month there. We were just sitting in an airport lounge in Frankfurt Airport. And we were both studying Italian, which we do a few weeks before we go over every year. We always hit the same level, but nevertheless. We were just sitting there studying, and this man walked up to us. And he was not a big man, but you could tell he was fit. He was a Black American. And he said, I was looking at you both across the room, and I just had to meet you. He said, there was something about the way you smiled. I didn't even know we were smiling. We were just studying Italian. But he said, tell me what you do. And we started talking, and it was the most beautiful thing because he was an American basketball player, and he had some record of the most assists or something. Most assists, yeah. And, but now he was working in France for a very prestigious basketball school, and they trained professionals, they trained children, and he said, you know, you and I are trying to do the same thing. You're trying to bring out the best, the highest potential in others. And we sat there, and we must have talked for over an hour, and then he gave us his card. We never saw him again, but we were just sitting there, but there was that connection. And so the gurus, each one of them has something that we can be in that track and let that guide our lives consciously. And that's, again, what Yogananda brought, was conscious awareness of daily life in every aspect. And how do we do that? Through the art of Kriya Yoga and meditation that he also brought. But if we can begin to live our lives with the conscious thought, not what's in it for me, but God, how can you use me? And no, nothing is too small. Nothing is too small. It may seem like it's not important, but I have seen in our years with Ananda, the littlest thing can change someone's life. Once Swami he was in the hospital, he had just had hip replacement surgery. And he was tired of being in the bed and in the hospital room. So he said, help me get in the wheelchair and just wheel me down the hall. I just want to have a different view. And so we did. And there was an old man sitting at the end of the hall who, I don't know what was wrong with him, but clearly some dementia or something. And he was strapped in his wheelchair, and he was just sort of slumped forward like that. And so he looked up, he said, oh, take me over to him. And so we wheeled him over to this man. And Swami just said, good morning. I mean, no, not a big deal. He said, good morning. And it was like Rip Van Winkle waking up from his sleep. He just began lifting his head. I mean, it took several minutes. And we just stood there, sat there. And then he focused on Swami. And light came into his eyes, animation into his face, and he said, good morning, sir. And it was just like watching a miracle. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a great lecture. It wasn't a great book. It was a good morning to a soul that was lost and abandoned. And we can all do that if we just forget about who we are. But there's a beautiful quote that a friend just sent me from a Christian saint, Saint Bede, B-E-D-E, and he said, when I no longer was the center of my own life, I could see God everywhere. And that's it. When we say, I want to just pour my energy into the flow of my guru, then we're no longer the center of our lives. And then it's so beautiful. You just see God everywhere. And you see him in people and dogs and flowers and plants, in disasters. You just see it. You get the bigger picture. And that's how we started off. Get the bigger picture. Understand that your life has great significance. You are not sitting in this church, this temple now, for no purpose. You are sitting here so that you can be a part of this great mission that Swami often said, and we didn't believe him at the time, or we were skeptical, I should say, when he said it. He said, I think hundreds of years in the future, people will look back and they will say the most important thing happening at this time in history, what was it? The computer breakthrough, the breakthroughs in medicine. He said the most important thing is Ananda and the communities movement, and history will prove that. And so let's get a big picture. Let's open our lives to a greater potential within us and realize that whatever we're doing in life, it can be a part of Master's mission. But we have to do it consciously, willingly, enthusiastically, and wholeheartedly. And that's what Swami showed us. Joy every moment of his life. If he was on dialysis, if he was finishing a great book, whatever, it was the same. It was living that joy and sharing it and magnetizing people into that flow. So it's just so thrilling, looking back, when you've been on the path 50 plus years, it's just so thrilling to see, this stuff really works. At first I didn't know, but now I know. And I've seen it in my friends, and I've seen it in myself. It works. It changes you. It changes the people around you. It changes the environment. And so let's begin, I should say. Let's begin each day with the thought, Master, you are steering my ship, but I'm putting everything I can of who I am to move it forward. So God bless you all. So we won't answer any questions tonight because we'll be answering lots of questions tomorrow. So thank you all for coming. I don't know if there's any announcements or anything. Okay.
Watch it quiet.
I live without fear.
Does that sound about right? Sounds right. Okay, great. All right. The green summer fade and winter draw near. My Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of
Thank you both so much. I've been sitting there thinking, what am I going to say to them? And soon it was turning into another whole talk. So I thought better of that. But I will say, your illuminating presence is a blessing. That's what it feels like. The light of these masters, the light of Swamiji, really just flowing through the two of you so beautifully, so perfectly. So I agree with you, Devi. The path works. And I think we get to feel that with both of you. Thank you so much. We are blessed. I imagine all of you know this, but Jyotish and Devi will be leading a 2-hour meditation here tomorrow morning from 7 till 9. And it won't be a talk, but it will be just being in the presence of great saints. And that is as good for our consciousness as anything could be. So if you can, please come and please join us. And then at 3:30 tomorrow, maybe 3:45, we have put up kind of, I would say impromptu, but it's so beautiful, it's not quite feeling that way, art show of a lot of Jyotish's art that's in the yoga studio. Much of it is for sale, but we can talk with you about the pieces that are here, other prints, how to really get a hold of a piece of his art. If you're interested, I'm sure Jyotish will have a few minutes worth of sharing for us about his art, the origin of it, some of the pieces. So 3:45 tomorrow, please come back and join us. And then, of course, Sunday service. So wonderful to share this evening with all of you, and hopefully we'll get to see more of you, and we'll all get to be in Jyotish and Devi's presence more this weekend.
I'm watching.